It's timely, it's insightful, it's motivating, it's empowering. It's Time with Fred, your inspirational broadcast with host Fred Gaddy.
Hello, and thank you for tuning into the Time with Fred podcast. This is a podcast that challenges paradigms and mindsets that hold us back. Glad to be bringing you season 2 of our podcast. We've been on you may call it a hiatus, but we're back with more powerful stories and interviews that will challenge you to be the best you can be. Today I have a special guest joining us all the way from Cape Town, South Africa, in the person of Rusty Labuschagne, who has a book and a story called Beating Chains. Rusty, thank you so much for coming on the Time with Fred podcast today.
Thank you, Fred.
Again, thank you for allowing your story to inspire the world. But Rusty, to take us back a little bit, I know the story, but for our audience who are watching and listening, take us back and tell us about Beating Chains. How did that come to be?
Okay, Fred. Well, thank you so much for having me on. Fred, Beating Chains is my autobiography. I come from humble beginnings as a fourth-generation Zimbabwean in a cattle ranching background. I was sent to, at the innocent age of 6, I was sent to a boarding school 200 kilometers away, 120 miles away from home. I lost my dad at 12, which turned our lives upside down, and then enjoyed the wild ways of the Rhodesian Bush War throughout my teens on cattle ranches. And it was a wild era. And being crazy about rugby and water polo and the war environment created a wild, hardy character. Hardships were part of everyday life. When I left school, I was real competitive. I just felt I'd lost out growing up, come from humble beginnings. I didn't do well working for people. I was more of a leader in sport as well. I ended up playing rugby for Zimbabwe, for my country. And after 7 years, I decided I'm gonna start my own business in the safari business. That's what I went into. After 5 years, I had done extremely well. I was flying my own aircraft. I had a fishing resort on Lake Kariba, flashy cars, houseboats, speedboats, you name it. Life couldn't have been better. And then in late 2000, during the political lawless land invasion chaos in Zimbabwe, I was framed for drowning a fish poacher close to my fishing resort on Lake Kariba. And on the 3rd of April, 2003, without a body, against police evidence, and on presumptions, I was convicted of drowning that poacher and sentenced to 15 years in prison, of which 5 were removed as remission. It turned my life upside down. The conditions were unimaginable. And I'll just run through some of them. I shared a cell 13 meters long by 3 meters wide with 78 other inmates. Each person had 33 centimeters, 13 inches, marked out on the walls in chalk. That was your space. The toilet was a stainless steel toilet bowl sunk into an open 1 meter square cement block in one corner. And you were packed like sardines with legs all crossing over in the middle. You all faced the same direction. When you turned over, it was all together. As cushioning against the cold concrete floor, you'd fold 2 of your paper-thin, worn-out, lice-ridden blankets several times to fit your space, 13 inches, then covered yourself with a 3rd one. And your clothes were wrapped around your toothbrush and toothpaste, or they'd get stolen, and that was your pillow. From sleeping on those freezing hard floors, my hips had bruised black rings for years, and shoulders still give trouble today. And then we had no basins with taps in the cells, and only one set of clothing was allowed at any one time. So we had to wash our clothes in the cell toilets at night wearing a blanket, then hanging them on the walls with smuggled book staples to dry by the next morning. And 3 or 4 of us would get together and take turns to wash our clothes because one garment had to be used to block the toilet to allow the toilet bowl to fill up when attempting to flush, and the water only ever dribbled in slowly.
Wow. Wow.
Then we'd wash the clothes on the cement block surrounding the toilet bowl, dipping them in and out as we washed. At about 5 a.m., we'd take the slightly damp clothes, place them on a cleanly swept concrete floor, and rub the creases out with a prison-made sponge. Then fold them neatly, place them in a pile, put a hand towel over the pile, and stamp on it hard with bare feet, leaving them perfectly ironed. Another hour hanging on the walls, they'd be ready to wear. And I just want to point to the listeners. Imagine wearing the clothes you're wearing now for 6 months without a change.
Wow.
We were only given clothes every 6 months, sometimes every 9 months, leaving us walking around in tatters. But imagine having to wash your clothes in a well-used toilet, then having to wear them the very next day. I often thought how far removed that situation was from my life before prison, with my beautiful home and wash down clothing every day. The humiliation was beyond comprehension. And then in 2005, Harare City ran out of water. So for 3 years, while I was in Chikurubi Maximum Security Prison, each prisoner was allocated only 1 plastic cup of water a day. 1 cup of dirty orange city runoff water from a nearby dam carried by farm prisoners. That was to drink, clean your teeth, wash your face, bath, everything, for 3 years. Most only bathed when it rained within our 4 hours out of cells. And that was after 9 months once. Then all 400 of us in our hall would make a mad rush into the exercise yard and excitedly have a thorough scrub. And it was like Christmas, trying to catch the best runoff water from the broken gutters.
Wow.
It was crazy. And then in my first 6 years, I watched over 2,200 people die, primarily from malnutrition. It was during the Zimbabwe dollar crash when there was no food outside of prison, never mind in there. And it was during that financial crash, the world financial crash of 2008. It was unimaginable. There were people dying everywhere. So I learned the most valuable life lessons and hidden attributes about myself were the lessons I learned in prison. And that's what I share on stages worldwide now, mostly virtually. And it's making a huge difference.
You know, it's. I know you share the story, Rusty, hundreds of times. What does it do to you when you're having to share? Because I'm watching you and I'm seeing your mind go back to the horrific conditions that you're subjected to, and take yourself from someone who was doing so well, living the life, right, as you rightly described it, you know, in your beautiful home with all the cars, and then the next minute, the next season of life, you're reduced to nothing. You know, that alone, Rusty, is enough to kill people. I mean, that shift alone. I mean, someone would rather die than be reduced to a life like that. And there's a quote that is attributed to you, and I quote you. It says, "Everyone is faced with challenges, but it is who you are and the depth of your determination that will get you through life's darkest moments." Could you respond to that?
Fred, people don't realize what they can go through in life. And I think that the human species have become weaker over time. If you look back at our folks and the life they led, and what they went through, and what they sacrificed to give us what we have today, we have actually a bunch of unappreciative people that whine about the most pathetic stuff on the earth. And when it comes time to bite the bullet, when you have no other option, or you'll die, you get through it. As long as you got a place to lie down, air to breathe, some water to drink, even if there's no food. I mean, we ran out of food. That's why the guys died. And it just proved to me that we can get through a whole lot more than we think we can.
Yeah, it's one thing you said, Rusty, in another interview that I was watching you on, and you touch on something that I often talk about: taking things for granted, right? You wake up and automatically you assume you're going to sleep and wake up. You automatically assume you're going to be able to breathe. You automatically assume you're going to be able to walk. You automatically assume that some of life's necessities are going to be there. And so you take those things for granted, right? But until you go through life where some of those basic things are taken away, until you realize that breathing is a big deal, or seeing is a big deal, or the ability to walk is a big deal, it changes your whole psyche. And if there's anyone to appreciate that, or to be able to speak clearly to that would be you, because you went from one extreme to the total extreme within a matter of days, or if I may put it that way. How has that shaped your perception about some of the things in life that we take for granted?
One of the biggest lessons I learned, Fred, is to appreciate things in life.
Mm.
And we all want too much in our lives, concentrating on what we haven't got instead of being grateful for what we have. And for me, giving thanks to God every day goes a long way. For a soft bed, running water.
Yeah.
And I just find that people create their own prisons outside of prison.
Mm.
And it's crazy. People have a big shout about a bad hair day or something wrong with their clothes. And, like this pandemic that's going on.
Yeah.
I mean, it's being blown so far out of proportion. But we need to look at the big picture. I mean, in prison, often we get so caught up in circumstances that we see only problems.
Yes.
In prison, we had nothing but difficulties.
Mm.
And if you give yourself over to them, they will literally kill you, kill your soul, your spirit, drain your strength, and lead to sickness. Scientists say that negative emotions lead to the excessive excretion of cortisol, which is a stress hormone in your brain. Cortisol is good, but too much of it can lead to chronic disease.
Mm-hmm.
I watched hundreds of guys die from stress in prison. They hadn't actually contracted a disease, yet they died from the worry of possibly perishing like so many others. When I was moved to a medium security prison in 2008 and 9, in 8 months, out of 1,200 of us prisoners at Harare Central Prison, 432 died. In 8 months, that's more than 1/3 of us in 8 months from cholera. And we had no social distancing. We were locked in a prison, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
No social distancing, packed like sardines at night, no hand sanitizers, no face masks, no gloves, no nothing. And through it all, I just kept my faith, remained positive, extra vigilant, and cautious. We are a tough species and can overcome the harshest conditions if we believe we can. And I think that that's something that people really need to think about. I mean, stop whining about little things. Yeah. They're very small now.
Viktor Frankl, one of my favorite authors, and you may have read his book. He wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, and he describes his experience in Auschwitz. And the essence of it is that, you can allow everything to be taken away from you, but one thing that you shouldn't allow to be taken away from you is your freedom. You have control, so they can do whatever. And he went through probably similar situations, and that you went through. And I mean, describing prison conditions, he shows how he responded to all the bad treatments that were being meted out. And you write about freedom in your book, which we're going to be covered. But how important is that? I mean, how does one choose to keep one's freedom intact in spite of everything else that's going on around them?
When you walk into prison, the first thing is the prison I went into, you walk in naked, stark naked. And when you get in there, I mean, you're state property. So everything, they give you your clothes, everything you see, read, write, say, hear, eat, drink, everything is controlled. You have no control of anything. You don't, everything that that comes from outside. It's all censored. There's guards watching you the whole time. It's like a closed, like hidden world. And when you speak to a God, his first thing he says, Garabasi. That means crouch down. If you don't, he'll completely ignore you. And that's true because they try and break you. And you got to be seen to be below them if you want to get their attention. And the whole time, because sometimes they'll say, shine my boots. You got to shine his boots. Roll over. You roll over. But I always said to myself, roll over, no problem. Shining boots, that's easy. But you will never change who I am. And that's the secret. They'd imprisoned my body, but I refused to let them imprison my mind. And it's such a strong lesson for people. Not, what someone else thinks of you is none of your business. You know who you are. Don't ever forget who you are. And so many people are intimidated, humiliated, everything. You know who you are. Stand strong. And I think it's a big lesson there.
That is such a powerful and profound lesson, Rusty, because you talk about the fact that you'll do all of that, but who you are is one thing that can never be changed. And I wonder, Rusty, how many of us go through life locked in our own prisons, allowing some of the things we go through, whether it's someone's opinion of us or what people say, whether it's your employer, whether it's a friend, or some of the silliest things that people get so worked up about to changes. But it's very powerful to hear you say that that's one thing, and I think it underscores what Viktor Frankl said in his book. But you also write about forgiveness, and Rusty, how does one find forgiveness after having gone through these horrific conditions? And your story is much like Nelson Mandela's, and I'm sure there are some similarities there, but he also chose to forgive or chose to find forgiveness. How did you find forgiveness, or how easy was it to find forgiveness or choose to forgive through all of this?
Fred, my situation was a little different because it's a very popular question after my talks. Everyone's suffering from forgiveness in some way. And mine was that I was pushed so low that if I hadn't forgiven them, I wouldn't have made it through there. And for me, now I'm just pointing out how it happened for me. And I'll never forget the exact moment. I was walking in that exercise yard and I'd had enough of all the anger, hatred, bitterness. It was draining me daily. And I looked up and I said to myself, Lord, take care of them. Let me get through this road that's been put in front of me. What goes around comes around, that they'll get what they deserve. And there's some spiritual moments in my life that I've experienced. That was one of them, because it was a physical feeling for me of release. It was like, I can't explain it, and I couldn't explain it then. I didn't understand it. But it wasn't a gradual thing. It was an instant thing. And they say that forgiveness is not a feeling or an emotion. It's a decision. It's the will to commit to doing something. Now, when you actually forgive, in your mind, you have to say, I'm going to forgive. Don't go with your emotions, because it won't work. And once I've done that, my life in prison changed. And give you an example, it's like if I'm holding a secret that's burning me big time, and I've been holding it onto it for years and years, and then finally in front of a bunch of people, I just tell them, and it's like, I can't get it back, it's gone. And it was that feeling of just like release, like it can't hurt me anymore. And that moment for me was the biggest change in my life in prison.
Wow.
Yeah. And as I said, for me, it was bigger than anything I could have achieved on my own. True forgiveness was inspired by God Almighty. And so I was letting go. It was a huge weight off my shoulders. And I learned to live in the moment from then on, because the past was too painful and the future full of unkept promises. So I just dealt with each day as it was. I learned to have faith, because no amount of worrying was going to change what I was going through. If you have anger or resentment towards anyone in any way, it will eventually destroy you.
Wow.
Because that is what those emotions do. They steal from you. They steal happiness and freedom.
Rusty, you described forgiveness as not a feeling, but a decision. And I like that we're talking about forgiveness, because there are so many, Rusty, who are locked up or who are withholding blessings because of this lack of forgiveness. And it's actually been scientifically proven that by choosing to hold on to hatred, or not choosing to forgive, people who have brought upon themselves sicknesses, diseases, heart attacks, high blood pressure. And the moment they make that decision to forgive or to let go, they find that their health begins to improve. And you talk to people who are somehow, caught in this, but then, you hear them say, well, I'm waiting for such and such to happen before I forgive. But you mentioned that it's a decision that you have to make. And it takes me back, Rusty, to the book of Job, which, I'm sure some of you, our listeners, have heard about, where Job, went through all that he went through, lost everything, and his friends dogged him. And it got to a point, this was towards the last chapter, and this is how it says, when Job decided to pray for his friends, after he prayed for his friends, that's when God heard him and restored everything that he had lost. We often hear that in the end, Job got twice as much, which is true, but something significant had to happen. Job had to pray for his friends who had dogged him. He had every right to not to forgive them, because, these were very close friends who, he was counting upon, but they all betrayed him and stabbed him in the back. But he got to that point where, in spite of all that they did to him, he decided to pray for them and he forgave them. And that is when the blessing was released, which I think is such a very powerful concept that is worth exploring a little bit, because I know it's not easy. I know there are people watching or listening who have been betrayed, stabbed by friends or loved ones, and they have every reason to hold on. But your experience, Rusty, and what you went through shows that it was when you decided to forgive, that's when you felt that release.
Yeah.
Correct.
Something else I want to share with you, and I haven't shared it on many, many interviews that I've done, was the guy I battled the most to forgive. And in Chikurubi Maximum Security Prison, there are 3 solid walls, and then the one wall is a grill mesh, and it's built in a hexagon. So the mesh is all on the inside, and outside is all solid walls. So you only see each other. You never see outside. And when we washed our clothes and hung them on the walls, they wouldn't dry by the next morning, especially in winter. So we used to hang them on the grill, and it wasn't allowed because it blocked the view for surveillance for the guards. And most of the guards were on site, they would understand, you give them cigarettes and stuff, and it was no problem. But there was one very cruel guard. He used to beat prisoners endlessly. He's just a horrible, vicious man. And Ngarazi was his name. And he was quite tall, skinny, hunchback, like buck teeth and a pale complexion, big eyes. And he'd always smile when he beat somebody. And they put him in reception because he was so violent towards prisoners. And he would get up at about 2 to 3 times a month and come around to all the halls at between 3 and 4 in the morning and write down all the garments that were hanging on the mesh. And then at 10 o'clock, when he's supposed to be having his tea, he would come and call all the prisoners. And he'd have all the names. Okay, cell 3, 3 garments. Cell 5, 2, and he'll have all the numbers. And those guys that had stuff hanging there, you had to put your fingers together or the palms of your hand, and he'd beat you with a baton on the ends or on the hands, and always smiling when he did it. And it was 5 on each hand for each garment. And I just, I stood there looking at this guy, and the only way that I could release my anger for him was to pray for him. I just felt sorry for him. I just said, God, just thank you that I'm not like him. And I pray one day he actually realizes how much damage he's doing, how much anger he's instilling in these guys in here. I just thought I'd point that out. I've never mentioned that, but it's talk about what Job had to forgive.
Yeah.
That was a tough one for me to forgive.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right, Rusty, it's, oftentimes when people share their success stories, it's about, what they have, where they are, the status, the money, and all of that. And you were living a pretty comfortable life. You're doing well until this adversity happened. But am I right in saying that the impact that you're having on the world right now is as a result of the adversity and hardship that you went through, beating the chains versus the life that you're living before? Is that a fair assumption to make?
100%. Fred, before prison, I was, I've done very well. I've worked really hard and took a lot of chances, and I landed on my feet. The opportunities were there, but I was a big fish in a little pool going nowhere, like a hamster on a wheel going round and round. And now I'm a little fish in a whole wide world, making a huge difference. And the difference I'm making now far out, the pleasure I get from helping others now far outweighs the millions I was making before, because I now have a purpose. I never had a purpose before. It was all about me, and making more money in my empire. And when is enough enough? When I came out, I lost everything. But now, and I could be in the safari business again. And I believe that it's my spirit that told me. Because when I started, a lot of people said, what got you into the speaking business? Because I was very good at what I did in the safari industry. And I was telling a group of guys from South Africa the story about addressing a congregation after I was released, because I wanted to let them know that I'm still sane,
Yeah.
So I had a speech. They threw a party for me. It's like 250, 300 people. So I decided I'm going to give a talk, and I did. And I told those guys around the fire about that talk. And the guy asked me if he could see if I had the talk with me. So I said, yeah, it's on my phone. So he said, can I have a look at it? So I showed him, and he scrolled down. He said, I've got a new life for you, my friend. This is your calling, and I'm going to sponsor you. And he flew me to Joburg, and I just had this spirit telling me, this is what you have to do. It's not about money. It's about making a difference. And once you start changing lives and inspiring people, and the feedback from your book and everything just rolls into just this wonderful big picture. It's hard to explain what and then you realize your why, your purpose. Yeah.
Wow.
So it's changed my life completely. So I often say to people, look what I went through, because I was never going to go where I am now. Where I'm going now is far outweighs where I was going to be. But I had to go through all that without being able to see or understand and figure it and put it all this mess together. Why me? What did I ever do? How come they can't get me out? And now look where I am. And I would never have got this far internationally, never. So God has amazing ways. He prepares you for where you're going. So if you're going through a real tough time, just remember you're being prepared for where you're going.
Absolutely.
God has a plan for you.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I've often said this, that sometimes our calling, or the calling we have, is born out of adversity. But oftentimes I think we become so fixated on the pain of the adversity that we miss out on a calling. And that's not to say that it's a fun thing. But Rusty, what defines you? This is one thing that I often ask my guests who come on the podcast. What defines you in life?
Fred, there are a few things.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing everybody always says is nobody else could have got through there. And I disagree with that. So I think resilience is a word that will define me. But I just want to point out that there's a difference between like fortitude and resilience. So fortitude, just the way I look at it, is somebody that it's more about structure. It's more about what you're made of. And you stand up to something rigidly, like you can take it. Resilience is when you can bend, you can knock down and you stand up, and knock down and you stand up. And I believe that fortitude cannot be learned. You either have it or you don't, but resilience you can. You can learn resilience. And so I think resilience is for me, is a very big one. Positivity is another one. I've always been very confident and positive from a little boy. My uncles always told me how I would overshadow my elder brother and everything from my confidence and positiveness. And my lawyer always used to say, you're like a cat. You always land on your feet, because I just take chances and buy a ranch and buy a drilling machine, and I'm just positive about whatever I did. I had this policy: put the boat in the water and then learn how to drive it. So I've always remained positive, and I believe that it was a big part of my getting through prison, is my positiveness. So that's another thing. And then I've always been a very loving person, passionate, and we're naturally wired for love. And I think that mainstream media, social media, PlayStations, everything is just negative violence, and we've lost love.
Yes.
We've lost what it means to love each other. And I just wish that would come back.
Rusty, there are people who are listening to this podcast. There are people who are watching this podcast who are locked up in prisons of all kinds, whether it's hatred, or it's unforgiveness, or past mistakes, or failure, or whatever. Gosh, this pandemic, the after effects that we're still dealing with. There's so many people who are locked up emotionally, psychologically, whether it's because they suffered a hardship, and not to minimize any of that. What would you say to someone who is just stuck in life? The main purpose of this podcast is really just to challenge the paradigms and mindsets that hold us back. There are so many people who've been held back by, mistakes or whatever that prison may be. What would you say to someone, Rusty, watching, listening, who just feels stuck in life?
That I've realized that even when you're not in prison, there are ways in which we imprison ourselves. In sour business partnerships, badly selected careers, being obsessed with money and ambition in the corporate world, even unhappy marriages. And it's only when you have your freedom completely taken away do you realize that you are actually in prison too. And when I look back at it all, it makes me wish I could somehow get through to people how precious and priceless freedom is. Freedom is not just not being in prison. Freedom is the ability to make a choice and act on it. Freedom is letting go of what you can't control. Freedom is forgiveness. Freedom is being free from negativity. Freedom brings health. If you can be free in all areas of your life, then you'll reach your full potential.
Wow. And that's why I'd imagine that nations, probably under colonial rule, would give everything they have for freedom, right? Because it's that powerful. Wow, yeah. Rusty, what a powerful lesson and experience. Again, your life, just hearing you talk, watching the smile and the spirit with which you're sharing your story, is such relieving. And I trust that if you've been watching or listening, that your life has been impacted by Rusty's story. And I'll encourage you to check out Rusty's book, Beating Change, and his website is www.beatingchange.com. grab that book, read a story, share this podcast with someone, and you just never know whose life you might be saving by just making this available. Rusty, thank you so much for coming on the podcast again and sharing your life and all that you went through. And I want to say thank you really for giving yourself to the world. And it's just so positive hearing you talk and living this life, even in spite of all that you went through. Any closing remarks, Rusty, that you want to share with our audience as we wrap up this podcast?
Life in prison or in Las Vegas is still just life. It's what you make of it, no matter where you are. I had everything I could ever wish for, and in moments it was all gone. Live life to the fullest, love more, and laugh from deep down hard. That's my message.
A good laughter. Rusty, thank you so much. And I want your quote again is worth sharing. It says, everyone is faced with challenges, but it is who you are and the depth of your determination that will get you through life's darkest moments. Again, remember, you can listen to this podcast on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Podbean, Amazon, and Pandora. Again, thank you for tuning in to the podcast.
Thank you, Fred.
Next time, stay well. Thank you, Rusty.
Okay. Bye-bye, Fred. Thank you.